I'm Gillian Lester, the Dean of the Law School, and I welcome you here today. I'm really tremendously honored that our inaugural speaker in this series is Tim Steinert. But first, I just want to say something about the origins of this series. And if you don't just immediately press delete when you get an email from the dean, you'll know that I talk a lot about community and how important it is to build community here at Columbia Law School, and that among other things, we've been building conversations of common interest to people here at Columbia. We have the Lawyers Community and Impact series that helps us look at the community around us and what's happening and connect it to the law we're learning. But we also have a new and emerging initiative around leadership. And we're hoping to build a curriculum around leadership that will help students while they're at law school not only learn the law, but learn something about the qualities that strong leaders have, and so that they can take with them when you graduate from Columbia Law School, both a great legal education and also some skills in leadership. The Dean's Distinguished Lecturer Series is an opportunity to interact with people who have graduated from Columbia and who have gone on to become distinguished leaders, which then brings me to the fact that it's hard to think of a better way to usher in this series than to have a leader so distinguished as Tim Steinert. Tim will be in conversation with Professors Ben Liebman and Tim Wu, also leaders in their own fields and part of the Columbia community. Tim Steinert is General Counsel of the Alibaba Group, the massive and massively successful global e-commerce company founded and based in China. And he's also a graduate of the class of 1989. He was a Harlan Fiske Stone Scholar. Tim was working as an English teacher in Taiwan when he decided to go to law school. And when he asked lawyers at the top firms in Hong Kong for recommendations of where he should go to law school if he wanted to pursue the combination of his interest in the law and his love of China and the Chinese language, they told him to come to Columbia. Columbia has stood out for decades above other law schools internationally as a place to pursue China and international relations. And I should point out that the individual who was leading the law school in its Chinese legal studies program, a path-breaking program, was Professor Emeritus Randy Edwards, who is also here. Welcome, Randy. So after graduating from law school, Tim moved to Beijing to practice corporate law as an associate at Coudert Brothers. His next move took him to Davis Polk's Hong Kong office, and then later to Freshfields, where he became a partner focusing on cross-border mergers and acquisitions and IPOs. He then went on to become in-house at Alibaba in 2007, when the firm was a fairly young internet startup, and he now, as general counsel, leads Alibaba's large legal department, and he helped, among other things that he has led at Alibaba, he helped shepherd through the record-breaking $25 billion IPO on the New York Stock Exchange in 2014. We're so grateful to have Tim here to speak with us. Please join me in welcoming Tim Steinert. Okay.
Well, why don't I just say thank you. Thank you for that introduction. One of my conditions about coming here to be the first in your lecture series was that I didn't have to lecture. But I also wanted to start by saying I definitely wouldn't be where I am now without this guy over here. I got into the law school because of Randy. Randy was Professor Edwards. Randy was really looking for people, fellow travelers who were interested in China. And I was helped through the law school by Randy, and I owe so much of my career to Randy, and I thank him very much for that.
Let me ask you a question about, your both in the tech economy, Chinese tech economy, obviously, an observer of it. And just from where you sit, what do you think are the sort of the strengths of the Chinese tech economy right now? What do you think are some of its challenges? It's always a question, I think, among Americans as to whether China is going to develop the tech economy becomes more important than Silicon Valley or not. And I'm just curious, as you've watched this industry mature, what your thoughts are on its strengths.
I think a good pool of labor of engineers, and it's growing fast. A significant part of that pool are Chinese who come to the United States and then work here for a while and then go back. We have research centers in the United States, partly to tap people here who don't want to go back or don't want to go back right away, but want to work for us. I think nimbleness, the people work very hard, and people work hard here and people work hard in Silicon Valley, but on average, people are, I'd say, willing to suffer longer to be successful.
Sure.
Willing to sacrifice much more of their lives
Right.
than perhaps many Americans.
Right. Now that's a high bar. We're already talking about the American tech industry.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
really.
'Cause you think about-
Of course, Silicon Valley works very, very hard, but just to see on any evening or weekend the number of people who are at work is pretty amazing.
And you're saying this having worked in law firms for many years
That's
before, right?
exactly.
So
Exactly.
You're going to discourage everyone from tech from their careers. And,
stay in the law firms, easier.
yeah.
I think companies like ours and Tencent also are, while based in China, very outward-looking. It's similar in Silicon Valley and other parts of the U.S., but willing to try everything. A lot of my colleagues, the average age in our company is 28, which is half my age.
Right.
Very, very young companies. People these days are willing, I think, they don't have that much ego, I'd
Right.
say. They're
Yeah.
willing to try anything, and they actually believe quite a lot in themselves.
Right.
Other than that, yes, we do. I mean, we do benefit from somewhat of a barrier to competition going into
Right.
China. And without that, would we be as successful? Maybe not. I think we would still be very successful. But I think it does help. It at least helps in the startup phase.
Right.
And then you know better than anybody that once you get to a certain level, that then that's the barrier to other people, not necessarily regulation or
Sure.
restrictions. Yeah.
Can I shift and since we're talking to a group of young lawyers or soon-to-be lawyers, sort of talk about some of the legal challenges you face in your job, and I'd love to hear you talk. I mean, I know you've never served as general counsel of Amazon or Google, but I'd love to hear you talk about, like, to what degree you think the range of issues you encounter day to day in your job differ or are similar to your colleagues at some of the major American tech companies.
I think the range of issues are pretty much the same. I mean, we have raising capital, general management, employment, commercial. The range of issues are generally the same. I think that what makes a difference, two big areas. One, the law and the legal system still isn't as well developed in China as the United States. So there's still quite a lot of flexibility, which is actually advantageous for a company in a new industry. It also makes it it makes it much more challenging to be a lawyer because it's you know this well. It's harder to predict which way is going to be successful. Probably in the range of 15 million or so, whereas in China, for 15,000 cases, more like 1.3 million US. So in China, our average cost per case is tiny, as illustrated by that, and most of the cases are very small. So.
Is that just because the lawyers are cheaper, because the process is simpler?
No, because we run an e-commerce platform, so
Okay,
the claims involved are relatively small.
I see. So, okay. It's not a procedural.
The lawyers are a lot cheaper.
Right,
yes,
right.
but the cases are many times cheaper. The cases are simpler, and the cost of the cases, as Ben knows, the time it takes to litigate a case is much shorter.
Right.
The whole process is cheaper, but because we have that many cases, as you know, we've developed a litigation platform, and we've tried to help the court system innovate, to use technology to help make the whole litigation process more efficient. So we've actually developed a bundle of software and services to help the local court in Hangzhou take the whole litigation process online. Just because if you have 15,000 cases, you got to find some way to manage that, and our litigation staff in-house handling that is something like 8 people for 15,000 cases, and we outsource to lawyers outside. One interesting phenomenon, probably the biggest driver of the growth of litigation, has been American-style ambulance chasing, sort of class action-like cases, mainly on the basis of the consumer protection law in China. So there are lawyers who go around and basically advertise for clients, and they specifically advertise for claims against us. Yeah.
So let me go back if you don't. Well,
I was going to ask another.
You want to back on that?
Well, I was going to, not on this, but a related question, which is, I mean, obviously, most of us familiar with Alipay. Those of us who spend a lot of time in China often get mocked by our inability to use Alipay, like the guy selling Zhima Shaobing, like sesame cakes to me is always like, how come you're using cash still, right? You know, but just curious, as you take that product overseas, and I know it's now available other places, how much do you see the challenge you navigate as being a legal challenge of getting into these new markets, whether it's Europe or the US, and different privacy laws, things like that? And how much of it is just a market that's already dominated by certain existing players, and you're trying to subvert the credit card companies and competitors? That is, how much do you face unique legal challenges in taking that product elsewhere?
Before, can you introduce the product a little bit? Because I'm
All the
guessing not everyone,
Luddites here, yeah.
not everyone knows.
I mean, Alipay at its core is an electronic payment system that's integrated into your mobile phone. So it's like Apple Pay at its core, linking your bank account with a payment platform. But more importantly, and you're further from this, is it's a wallet. I mean, basically, people can have their whole financial lives on their phone. So it's payment, it's your bank account, it's borrowing, it's investing, everything. It's paying for your electricity, for all your utilities. It's integrated financial services right on your phone. This is an interesting aspect of China. It's not really because of protectionism, it's because China hasn't been as developed, and the confluence of old financial services industries and the regulation that's layered on top of that hasn't been built up in China. So we've been able to develop those services and bundle them together without a lot of the regulation that they face in other more developed economies. And so, coming out of China, very much so, it's a big challenge for us. In the United States, the money transmitter business, which is essentially just the payment function, is you're doing a money transmitter. You're not the bank. You're not lending. You're not taking deposits. You're just transferring money. That's regulated on the state level in the United States. So you have to, if you want to operate in every state, you've got to get a license in every single state in the United States. And it's a good example of how the U.S. is particularly inefficient in regulation. And then the credit cards, you may have written some articles about credit card antitrust.
Right.
Credit cards are ingrained in the society, and they have tremendous power, and they charge too much in the United States. And behind that is there's a tremendous vested interests behind that, and a whole system based on credit cards. It's hard to break down that entry barrier for us.
Right. Right.
What we make on transactions in China is a fraction of what credit cards charge. Now, credit cards also provide other services that we haven't entirely taken the cost on. Backing up, allowing you to return a product if you lost your credit card, if it's stolen, and so forth. Those all have costs. But I haven't done a study on it. My view is they're probably making monopolistic returns that haven't been challenged. I always am amazed that still sending a wire transfer, the banks here will still charge you $25 a wire transfer. It's outrageous. And they'll say, well, it's because we got to use, we're regulated this way or that way, we've got to use this system or that system. But the fact is that people are paying too much for a service that should cost much less. And it's very hard for foreign companies to break into that.
It's hard for domestic companies. I mean, I think the tech companies have tried to do it in the United States. Apple surrendered basically.
Yeah.
Apple Pay is basically enabling credit card payments.
Yeah.
They just added another margin. They gave up.
Yeah.
For an example.
Really. Yeah.
But it's unusual and interesting when the Communist Party in a socialist country ends up being less regulatory. Happens sometimes than the bastion of free enterprise known as the United States, but it certainly happens in some areas. Can I ask back to the sort of career question? So you were a young graduate of Columbia Law School at some point. You'd been an English teacher in Taiwan. I also was an English teacher in Taiwan, although purely a freelancer. And you took this career path, I think, which was once the career path, I think you moved to Hong Kong first after, and then sort of began working more in China. Is it still the same career path? Do you think things have changed since your time for people who, are lawyers interested in China or Chinese law? I'm just curious what you see, with young people coming up.
When I was graduating from Columbia, I said I would never work on Wall Street.
Okay.
And I was really interested in going out and doing the China thing. And I did it for 3 years, but then I realized I needed to work on Wall Street. Because China then was just starting to do IPOs, and that's a skill set. It's not a particularly sophisticated skill set in my view, but it's a skill set and a rigor that's important, and particularly learning how to draft, learning how to write a prospectus well comes from doing that over and over again. And this place, New York City, is still probably the best place in the world to do that. So I think it still is very important to get great training from people who are smart and have done it before. And New York is the capital of legal practice in the world, and I think it's a great place to do it. In China, everywhere there are many other skills you need to be successful as a lawyer. In China, still, I'd say business skills and people skills are even more important than legal skills. But for our legal department to do a good job, you need to have a good brain and be able to convert that into good work product. I think one of the differences in practicing law in China in our company is that a lot of our folks are not, a lot of the legal people, partly because of the environment, are not as aggressive as I think American lawyers are trained to be. I mean, aggressive in the sense of being confident in their own views and understanding that they should have a place at the table, and they should speak up. And I think the training environment in the U.S. for lawyers really helps with that. So I think it's great to see Chinese faces out here. You guys getting the basic training here, and I think it's not just law school. It's working in top firms. It doesn't necessarily, working on Wall Street or working in big M&A doesn't necessarily mean you're working in New York. You can be working in California, you're working in London, you're working in Hong Kong, but working in an environment that is doing challenging transactions and where you're working with people who are really good at what they do. I think that's very important, and I certainly hope that companies like us will have more of a flow of people like that, so people from China who have that type of a training, because I think that will help us step to higher levels in the future.
Right.
Well, because when you're looking to hire, you still want to see people who've spent those years at a big firm getting that training.
Yes, ideally, yeah. Big firm, or also a big company with a strong
In-house
legal
shop.
department. Yeah, I think we both for people who come from law firms, from multinational companies, and from Chinese companies, there's still quite a lot of an adjustment to working at a Chinese internet company, but having great training is sort of the one of the foundations that I will look for in hiring people.
That's a related career question, just quickly, which is you were 18 years into your legal career, partner at a major international firm. It's not exactly most people don't leave to join a startup at that point. So what led you 18 years in to jump ship and throw the partnership away and go to this company that was just emerging?
Well, it's an interesting story. I was sort of ready for a change. I had done a lot of IPO work, private M&A work, and I was looking for something different. That was one thing. Basically worked in the China legal business most of my career. I only spent about 2 years here in New York. So I was sort of looking, but what helped was I actually had met a Yale student who was my freshman advisee, in 1983, and a guy named Joe Tsai, who then went on to Yale Law School, went to Sullivan Cromwell, and then went into investing, and then joined Alibaba, and I had kept up with him. And just at the time I was starting to look around, Alibaba, we did our first IPO of a subsidiary. So he was looking for help, and he went to someone he knew. I think, but for him, the fact that I knew him, respected him personally, and respected his skills, helped a tremendous amount. Otherwise, it would have been tough, I'd say, moving over. And having, he has been instrumental to helping Alibaba sort of navigate the financial world in raising investment, and also to help the legal department build its role in the company. It's been really great.
Going back to career tracks, and this is, I think, really of interest to people. So we have usually Chinese students who are coming here, which is one mechanism. But then we also, I think, have graduates who are raised in America, interested in Chinese work. And for a long time, Hong Kong seemed to be the classic. You mentioned Wall Street. Hong Kong was the gateway. Do you still think that is sort of the track that all roads lead through Hong Kong, or is it different?
I'd say Hong Kong is still an important place. When I first moved to Beijing with Couder, there were maybe 3 international law firms there, and maybe a total of 15 international lawyers there.
Right.
Now they're probably hundreds, and thousands of domestic lawyers. There were no. Well, there were some.
So what year was this that you moved to?
That was '89.
'89. Wow.
I was. I had already decided to join Couder in whenever that was, in the fall or in the winter of '88. So the legal market has exploded in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Shenzhen, and other parts of the country. So it's exponentially different than before. Hong Kong, the financial services, the services industry for Asia has been growing at a lot slower rate. Recently, I think one of the trends is that many more of the professionals there are mainland Chinese, whereas before they were local Chinese or foreigners.
Right.
Hong Kong as a commercial hub has reduced in its importance. And does the shipping port need to be there anymore? That's arguable. In the financial services industry, I think there's still quite a lot of road to go because of the sort of still relatively controlled environment on the mainland.
Do you want to open up the question a little bit?
I want to see if Professor Edwards has any questions.
Well, I have observations, but I'm mesmerized.
You want to turn your?
I'm waiting for Tim. Yeah. Does this work? Do I have to turn this on?
If there's a button, where'd it go? Here it is. Here you go.
Okay, good. Have you written the book yet, Tim? If you haven't written it, you ought to write it, because your story is not only told me a million things, and the questions have been great as well, I should say. But you've told me a lot that I certainly don't hear on our evening news. I don't see it in our press. And particularly, I would say, what you're talking about is something that's very hard, I think, in both of our countries and our societies to talk about, is that the other side has merits. The other side has human beings who are doing the same thing we're trying to do here, that we encourage our children to do, is to work hard and be productive. And instead of building these political barriers, and I won't mention the word building walls, we should be doing exactly what Tim's career has exemplified, is looking at ways that this country, our economy, and our lawyers can work with those in China and other countries to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Great.
You want to comment?
Well, I absolutely endorse that. We as a company, we actually look to the United States quite a lot. We look to Silicon Valley as a model. We look to the education system here, which encourages much more free thinking than traditionally the education system in China. There's a real yearning to make ourselves successful in the United States, and I think you talk about maybe protectionism. We sort of take it as a kind of a little bit of an insult. But if we think we could do just as well with an open economy, we do want to see ourselves as the best, and we think that it's a win-win for China and for the U.S. To be competing with each other and to be exchanging with each other, to have companies like us work with other companies in developing better technologies for everybody is the way of the future. It's unfortunate that politics and other interests are sometimes too much of a barrier on both sides.
I'll ask you, this is a very open-ended question, but are there any, sometimes people ask you, when you look back at your career, now you've had a career where you've done a lot of things, are there moments that you really relished? You thought this was these were the best periods. I'm not saying now was best or better, but just periods where you think back about it. Now,
Other than Randy's class, right?
Yeah.
Classes.
No, it was good. I'm just kind of curious, having done all the things, whether it was the early days of the startup or maybe law practice. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I got there after the startup days, to be honest. I think the most significant one was our IPO for me. I mean, it's partly because I was on the outside of so many companies doing IPOs, and when you're a service provider, it's one thing. You have the vicarious pleasure of seeing an IPO, but being on the inside and having it be your company, it also helps that you have shares in the company. But to be an American working with a Chinese company listing on the New York Stock Exchange was pretty neat. Yeah.
We have a question way back. Yeah.
Hi. I have a question that relates to the issue that the Dean raised at the beginning about leadership. And I wondered if you could speak to whether you have any initiatives where you use the power that you have as a general counsel at a big firm to influence maybe behavior in other places. And just as an example, I've worked with a lot of general counsels in the last years, but I've also been on the other end at a law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, in fact, dealing with RFPs to get clients. And I know that some companies will ask about diversity or pro bono, or they'll create initiatives in their community. And I wonder if you've looked at that, or what kind of initiatives you might have.
Yeah, well, we certainly look at it. I have, it's, as a foreigner in China, it's hard for me to
I guess you're the diversity.
Yeah.
Is that right? You're the diverse hire in China.
It's hard for me to have as much impact outside of Alibaba, me personally, outside of Alibaba as I might as a general counsel in a U.S. company here in the United States. As a company, we are very active in promoting philanthropy, in environmental protection. As a legal department, one of our visions of the legal department, we have our own mission and vision, is to influence the development of the legal system in China. And we are doing that now principally through what I mentioned earlier, helping the local courts to develop an online court system. So that as a legal department, that's very much part of our mission and vision. In terms of diversity, we as a company are very undiverse. It's 99.9% Chinese, but that's because 95% of our revenue is from China. In terms of on the gender side, actually our legal department is about 60% women, which is pretty typical of in-house in China at least. We don't really need to promote that in particularly. That's just the way the job pool works. As a company, we actually have probably about 30% of our senior executives are women. We have a partnership at the senior level, and it's about 30% women. So some of our most senior people are women. I'd say, in terms of pro bono work, China and Alibaba legal department are still behind the United States pro bono per se. But this is a lot of companies would say this, but we also firmly believe that what we're doing is bringing people out of poverty. Just providing an e-commerce platform where a small business in one part of the country can sell to anybody in the country without the tremendous investment of building the infrastructure to get to the consumer is a tremendous contribution to the development of the economy in China.
I think we have time for maybe one or two back there. Maybe two more.
Hi, first I want to thank you for coming here and present us with this amazing conversation. I really enjoy it. So as a 1L in Columbia Law School, I have a question about career path, because you mentioned that currently in Alibaba your role as general counsel, but you also mentioned that work as a business partner. So I wonder how you make the transition from law firm into tech company and in-house. So how do you feel this different position ask for in terms of skill set? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still making the transition. It's not easy. We've run into lots of people who are smart, very accomplished, but they crash and burn when they come in-house. The biggest difference, of course, is that the buck stops here. So when you're in a law firm, a lot of law firms talk a lot about giving practical advice, helping business leaders come to their decision, but still tend to be much more conservative. It's partly because they want to protect their own interests, but partly because if they make a mistake, then they're afraid of getting blamed, partly because they don't understand all the dynamics inside a company. So the difference is that the decision is yours, and you really have to give up there is a risk, there's this risk, there's that risk. The guy wants your decision on should he do this or should he not do it, and that's tough because you need to understand try to understand at least as much as he understands about his business, about the other risks that he's facing, and place it in the right context, place the legal risks in the right context, so you can say, well, I think that this choice notwithstanding whatever they are, this choice is the right choice. And so you have to be well informed, and you have to have guts to do that, and that's not for everyone.
We had one, this gentleman, I think, in the front.
So thank you, Tim, for your excellent speech. I worked for ExxonMobil for over 10 years as an in-house counsel. So vice versa, you worked as a US person, you worked for a Chinese company as a legal counsel. I'm a Chinese person working for a US company as a legal counsel. So I want to get your input on the perspective of what's the difference of how about a US person working for a Chinese company as a counsel, because there's two issues. One is about the compliance issues. In the US, the rules are very clear, and sometimes you can get a sense of it. But in China, as you said, the law is developing, and sometimes you have to make very hard decisions. So in one aspect, you have to be a partner of the business side, and the other aspect, you have to put your head as a compliance officer, because you don't want the company to run into trouble of legal compliance. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is about your interactions with the senior business person. Because in China, like you said, the legal department is not like totally independent. So it's heavily influenced by the senior managers. That's my understanding. It could be wrong. So I want to get your input.
Yeah.
And another aspect is about the government. So in China, the economy is a pretty government-led economy. It's different from here. And there is advantages and disadvantages. And what's your viewpoint? How to handle that relationship? Yeah. So one is about government. The other is about, basically about the
It's like
stakeholders.
He's asked 5 questions already. So.
Yeah, so the question is about corporate governance. So there are different stakeholders: government, the senior management company, and compliance issues. The issue owed to the whole society. So maybe you could just one is good enough.
What do you think?
Thank you.
It's a good, nice, small, narrow question to end.
No, I said earlier, I think on the compliance side, it's easier and harder. Easier because you have more flexibility. Harder because it's hard to see what, where it's less black and white. So there's more risk in advising one way or the other. You're right that, as I said earlier, that there's less experience internally with compliance, but that's also an opportunity to create your own compliance environment. I think we hire people from MNCs, and there's a high failure rate because they're accustomed to clear rules, and clear rules make life easier for a compliance person. You don't really have to use your brain that much because the rule's written down there. Why, and I saw this with junior associates in law firms, people don't understand why it's written a certain way because they never had to really create it in the first place and think about the underpinning rationale for something. And if you have to do that, you have to create, and we're creating compliance systems all the time. You really understand. You understand why it has to be weighted one way or the other. You don't just put it there because somebody else has written it that way before. I think in terms of the stature of the legal department, Alibaba, it's certainly, as I said before, it's not as high as it might be at an ExxonMobil. But it's not subservient. It's certainly not the way, in some state-owned enterprises in China, you never see the lawyers. They're not at meetings. They're not involved in decisions. That's not the case with us.
Well, in case we paint too rosy picture of American practice, when I worked in business in Silicon Valley, I was on the business side. We definitely hid a lot of things from the lawyers.
Yeah.
Whole areas we kept out of it. So I'll just say that, like, I wouldn't entirely
could, right?
think it's perfect, and the lawyers are like the center of everything in the United States.
That's nature, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to if everyone join us, and maybe the dean
Yeah,
is
I
gonna
was
say-
just gonna, I didn't mean to take the words out of your mouth,
Yeah.
Tim, but I'll take the words out of your mouth,
Sure,
which
please,
is
please
to ask everybody here to join me in thanking our guest, Tim Steinert, as well as our professors who gave us a lively conversation. So thank you so much for being with us.